My name is John Simon. Welcome to Church History for Chumps, and I'm happy that you're here. I'm happy that you're here, listener. I'm happy that I'm here. I'm happy that another person is here. My good friend Jacob Lewis. Say hi, Jacob.
Hey, yeah, you don't have to talk to yourself this time.
That was fun. Did you listen to that episode?
Yeah, I did.
You're very. It feels weird to to just acknowledge your loyalty to the show, because I feel like I'm like patting myself on the back. I'm really just like, you're a good friend, and I appreciate you listening.
Yeah, it's not, and this isn't to diminish any of that, but it's also that I just listen to a ton of podcasts all the time.
Okay.
And that's, it is to say, like, I do enjoy your podcasts pretty regularly, but I listen to a lot of podcasts too.
Okay. All right. So we're not cream of the crop, and that's okay. We never claimed to be. That's totally fine. Well, Jacob is filling in for Thomas today, which is a bummer that Tommy's not here, but also I'm excited because I've been wanting to have you on the show for a while. We have a lot of wonderful conversations that I often think, man, if only we had recorded that so that a bunch of strangers could listen to it and be entertained by it. So yeah, Jacob, why don't you tell us real quickly a little bit about yourself?
Hey, I'm a guy who grew up in Arizona. Grew up in Phoenix. Glad to be out of there. Been living in Tucson for 2 years, and before that I was living in Spain, and then before that I was living in Tucson. I'm currently a teacher of middle school. Most of what you think about middle schoolers is true. The experience of being in a room with 20 of them at a time is exactly as you're probably picturing. And I'm glad it's a weekend right now.
That's
basically.
Right. Yeah. Jacob, is it true that you're currently kind of exploring the Eastern Orthodox faith?
Yeah, I'm technically a catechumen at this point. Was an inquirer, as the designation goes, for a little bit, and I'm probably about a month and a half into being a catechumen of the Antiochian Orthodox Church.
That's awesome. Yeah. Okay, so Jacob, I didn't tell you this before I hit record, but I have kind of like a new game that I'm trying out that I want to make you my guinea pig for. So it's called 10 words or less. So I'm going to ask you 3 questions, and you can answer each question in 10 words or less. And every leftover word you have will become an extra word.
It's kind of a math game.
There's a little bit of math in this.
Okay.
But it's really just about asking you questions that I'm sure you'll want to answer with more than 10 words.
Okay.
So it's really it's a test in being succinct. First question. Who is a figure of the Eastern Church that in some way influenced your decision to look into Orthodoxy?
Well, I would say Gregory of Nyssa was a key figure in that. He's actually the name I've taken as my catechumen name and potentially my baptismal name. He was a brother of Basil the Great, and a friend of mine is actually a friar in the Franciscan order, and he took the name Basil and sort of introduced me to the Cappadocian Fathers, and thereby learned about Gregory of Nyssa and some of the incredible things that he was able to do in his time. Oh, I'm over 10.
Yeah, that was like 75.
Oh, wait.
Words.
I forgot we were playing a game.
It's okay. That was a great answer. No, you're good. I remember I said, like...
What's my punishment?
I don't know.
Or my penalty?
It's not like a radio show. I'm not going to like make you jump into a tub of Jell-O or something.
Okay, so I'm in the negative right now as far as words I have to answer the next question. All right,
we're gonna say this: the next 2 questions you're limited to 5 words.
Oh, okay.
Now.
I'm actually I'm gonna actually count this time.
Okay.
All right, I got my hand up. My fingers.
All right, this one I know is gonna bother you because I think you're gonna want to answer it pretty long.
Nice.
Do you think Origen got a bad shake in not being accepted into the sainthood?
I think he gets a bad rap for being just only remembered. Oh, I didn't count again. Oh, okay. I'm counting. Right. Okay, so 5 words.
I'll give you back 10. I'll go back to 10. Yeah,
I'm gonna try the 5.
Okay, all right, try it.
I think he
You're 60% done.
got a bad rap.
Okay. All right. Okay. I remember that's one of the first like deep cut theology conversations we had years ago when you were like, yeah, we talked a lot about Origin kind of getting a lot of people who after the fact had kind of come back and said, actually, Origin wasn't really that solid, but he's not our topic today. All right. Last one. What's a film you watched recently that you enjoyed?
I guess that would be, I saw The Substance.
Oh yeah,
I literally fainted.
Yeah,
during
that's
the movie.
right.
That's the first one that came to mind. Yeah,
that's like the it's like what is it? It's all about what is the surgery, cosmetic surgery, plastic surgery. Is that what it's all about?
Yeah, it's kind of the subtext and aging, and
it's pretty gruesome.
The beauty industry. Yeah. There was actually a moment where someone else in the theater fainted. I saw him faint, and then I had some kind of empathetic fainting spell.
Oh my god!
And then later I learned that another dude also fainted.
Yeah.
I guess around the same time. They called the paramedics for this other guy, and I just turned to my wife and I said, I think I'm fainting, and then I fainted.
You just passed out,
and she thought there was like a gas leak or something, but thankfully, it was just nerves.
Yeah,
there's some pretty gruesome. I've always been a fainter when it comes to blood.
Really? But I've seen some gnarly films with you back in the day.
Yeah, and there's this zero like conscious element. It's fully just a subconscious response. I can be thinking the whole time like it's not real. I'm safe. I get my blood drawn, I instantly faint. I tell every doctor, the second you put a needle in me, I'm going to faint. Yeah. My dad's like that. My brother's like that. So, I don't know, something in the family. Doesn't have to do with, you can explain it all you want. It doesn't matter.
Wow.
Pretty weird.
I remember in middle school watching a filmed recording of Sweeney Todd, a filmed performance. And I'm pretty sure that what the effect they did when Sweeney Todd, the demon barber, was cutting people's throats was that they had like a clearly fake blade that they were like wiping orangish red liquid on the person's throat. It was very, very fake. But for whatever reason, it did not matter. I was so nauseated by it. Like it's like probably one of like 5 very distinct memories I have from that class. And that would have been close to 20 years ago at this point, which is that's a very unsettling thing I just said. Well, cool. Well, thanks for being here, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So hey everybody, we're talking today about Justin Martyr. We are still kind of slowly walking through our series called The Early Church Gets the Worm, which is very loose and not really super sequential. But we're basically talking about different periods and, at this point, different figures in church history. And we're starting with one of the really fascinating figures of the 2nd century. He was a dude who was born about 100 years after Jesus, so very, very close to like that time of the apostolic era. And what really fascinates me about Justin, and I think why I'm excited about talking to you, Jacob, about this, is that he was, whenever I watch any material, whether it's like a YouTube video or just kind of like a Christian thinker that I really appreciate, and they talk about their frustration with Christianity being presented as a kind of anti-intellectual, like just a bunch of superstitious people who were just crossing their fingers and looking at stars, basically. One of the first people they mention is the influence of Justin Martyr, because Justin Martyr was by no means a superstitious guy. He was a very, very sharp dude, and he was probably one of the first key figures who brought a strong philosophical kind of backbone to the early church, which I think is really interesting. So yeah, let's get into it. So Justin is going to be born sometime between the years of 90 and 100 AD. He's going to be born in Samaria, which of course is a place that Jesus traveled through quite a bit during his time in ministry. He's going to be born in a Roman town called Flavia Neapolis. Despite his closeness to a lot of prominent Jewish and Christian areas, he's actually not really going to be affected by Judaism at all. His family's going to be Greek, so he's an uncircumcised guy, mostly disconnected and disinterested in Judaism. And you have to think, at this point, Christianity is really nothing more than kind of a cult religion that's like spawned out of Judaism. So nobody's really thinking about Christianity that much at this point in time. So when Justin kind of comes of age, he's always going to be a very philosophically minded young guy. Even in school, he's going to find himself jaded pretty quickly, just not really finding himself very stimulated. And when he gets to be a young man, he's going to travel to Alexandria and Ephesus, which are homes of essentially the richest libraries in antiquity around this time, because he wants to study philosophy, because deep down, Justin is 100% a philosopher. And so what happens, and what I really love about this part of his story, is it kind of becomes this sort of Goldilocks and the Three Bears story, where he's like trying all these different schools of philosophy, and each one he's just like, it's not that great, you know, or he'll find something out and just be like, this really didn't do it for me.
Yeah, he tried the Pythagoreans for a bit, and he went to a Pythagorean leader, and he asked him if he knew enough about music.
That's right.
To be a
that's
Pythagorean.
Right. And he was like, I don't want to do that.
Sorry, guys. I haven't studied music theory. And they're like, well, you're not going to make it here.
That was, it's literally like, it's so funny. Yeah, because he was like, how's your knowledge of geometry and music? And he was like, I don't know anything about those. And they were like, well, come back when you've studied
Aren't
them.
you the teacher? It's like going to school and the teacher being like, you know about math yet? And they're like, no. And he's like, well,
go figure
come back
it out
when you figured it out and I'll teach you something else.
Yeah, it's like, okay,
what is a teacher for then?
I love that. The first philosophical school he tried to talk to was the Stoics, and the complaint that he made was that he kept asking his teacher like how he felt about like knowledge of self, like knowledge of like the intrinsic nature of man, and his teacher was just like, that's not important, and he was like, forget this guy, like this is a waste of time. So yeah, he's gonna talk to the Stoics and the Aristotelians, the Pythagoreans, and then eventually he's gonna find himself with the Platonists, and they're kind of gonna resonate with him the most, which is, you know, very interesting considering the influence of Platonism on a lot of the early church and how they just kind of saw and filtered the scriptures. But yeah, the views of Plato were going to connect the most with young Justin, specifically their views of very rigorously pursuing virtue, and also this idea that you can enlighten one's mind into kind of the supernatural, transcendent things of the universe, that you can kind of meet God in this like mental level through like levels of ascension. Those were all very deeply interesting to him. And so Justin has this kind of road to Damascus story where he's going to be, as he's very involved in this Platonist school of thought, he's going to be walking along a shore, very much in isolation, and he's going to run into this old guy. And Justin's going to be wearing a philosopher's cloak, which was a very common thing for students and teachers of philosophy to kind of walk around in this cloak. That kind of lets people know, oh, this is a very learned guy here, and would often provoke people to like ask them questions and kind of explore, you know, hey, tell me about this and this, and then kind of start a conversation. And so this old man essentially says, oh, so you're a philosopher. Well, tell me about this and tell me about that. And, you know, just after a small number of questions, essentially kind of gets Justin to this point where he's like crap, I really don't know. And he's asking questions about God. He's asking questions about man's immortal soul and the difference between humanity and being like an animal. And essentially Justin's like, shoot, I realize that even Platonism is really not scratching that existential itch for me.
I think it's important to recall too that compared to our culture, where picking a religion is kind of like you just read a list of beliefs, and then you decide like, yeah, I'm gonna take that on and just call myself this. People taking on the moniker of Stoic, just reading about it on the internet and deciding like, yeah, this Marcus Aurelius guy,
yeah,
I'm down with this.
Just following a couple Stoic pages on the Instagram.
Yeah, just like following an influencer,
right,
who's into just reading quotes. But for people at this time, it was like you were committing your life to the Stoic lifestyle. If you were believing the Pythagorean beliefs, you were committing to a Pythagorean life, that involved all kinds of ritual practice and asceticism, fasting and abstaining in certain times. It wasn't just, I like this belief system. It was these came with a life, and for him being willing to jump into these different lifestyles. It wasn't just, what am I going to believe? It's how am I going to live?
That's really interesting, because that's typically what we think of, not when we think of philosophy. That's kind of how we think of religion. But it's almost like these were religions that didn't have like the origin story. I mean, some of them did, but they were the religions that didn't have like the story, but more had like the view of how to live and then the practical implications of what that looked like. So it really was like a kind of committing yourself to something that it wasn't just something that you could be like, I'm a Stoic, but I'm still basically living the same way everyone else does.
Yeah, and same for the Platonists too. They had their own set of meditative practices that you were expected to participate in. It wasn't just sitting and reading the works of Plato. It was a lifestyle. It was a community.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and that actually makes a lot of sense for how Justin would eventually convert and then apply that same kind of understanding of this is an all-encompassing thing for my life to Christianity instead. So I'm going to read an excerpt for you guys. This is from one of Justin's surviving writings that he actually talks about this interaction that he had with this happenstance old man. So he says, whom else then, I reply, could one take as teacher, or from what quarter might one derive advantage if the truth is not even in these philosophers? And the old man responds, there were a long time ago men of greater antiquity than all of these reputed philosophers, men blessed and righteous and beloved of God, who spoke by the divine Spirit and foretold those things of the future, which indeed have come to pass. Prophets do men call them. They and they only saw the truth and declared it to mankind without fear or shame of any, nor dominated by ambition, but saying only what they had heard and seen, filled as they were with the Holy Spirit. Now their writings still remain with us even to the present time, and it is open to anyone to consult these and to gain most valuable knowledge both about the origin of things and their end, and all else that a philosopher ought to know if he believes what they say. For they have not made their discourses when they wrote with logical proof, inasmuch as being trustworthy witnesses of the truth, they are superior to all such proof, but the things that did take place and are taking place now compel agreement with what they have spoken. In our last statement here. And yet, even on account of the miracles which they had wrought, what they were entitled to belief, for they both glorified the Maker of all things as God and Father, and proclaimed the Christ sent from him as his Son, a thing which the false prophets, who are filled with a seducing and unclean spirit, never did nor ever do, but dare to work miracles of a sort to amaze men, and give glory to the spirits of error and demons. But pray that before all else the gates of light may be opened to thee. For things are not seen nor comprehended of all, save of him to whom God and his Christ shall have understanding. Yeah. So this is this really does kind of fill in the gap, because one of the things that Jacob, you and I spoke about just real briefly when we talked about Justin Martyr is, I think there is a temptation, especially for us in a modern world, to, I mean, I get why people have this stereotype against Christianity that it's very anti-intellectual, because I think that if you were to show a bunch of stoic philosophers to your average everyday Christian or average everyday pastor, they could easily say something like, this philosophy means nothing. Philosophy is pointless. We just have Jesus. But Justin is actually going to do the opposite and say, no, these philosophers are all just kind of grappling with truths that only Jesus is the full and perfect embodiment of. And so it's not that philosophy is ineffectual. It's that philosophy is really important. And the greatest culmination of all truth and philosophy is this man, Jesus Christ, which is very groundbreaking, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah. I think he's a very relevant figure to our time now, where I think a lot of people are young people are sort of deracinated from any religion, the way that you just described his sort of early wanderings of trying things on, just like hats, like trying the Pythagorean style on and just seeing if it fits, and seeing it fall flat in a short time. I think a lot of young people are in that position now where they're looking for something stable and willing to try things on, and waiting for to see if it makes things fit, if it makes things make sense of their lives.
Yeah.
And we're living in America, being such a weird place where, in other parts of the world where Christianity is kind of tied to your ethnicity, or your religious tie is kind of an ethnic tie, where we find ourselves in America, especially not having any of that to fall back on. The way this interaction that Justin is about to have with the Jew of the dialogue here, where he finds himself in a place where he can really decide for himself what is going to make sense of my life and what am I going to commit myself to.
Yeah, no, that's solid, dude. And so what we're gonna see is Justin having had this conversation with this individual and realizing, oh shoot, he kind of calls to mind the prophets. And remember, during this time, the texts that would soon become the New Testament were just now being written. And so it's not like Justin had a lot of New Testament material to go back to. So he goes to study the prophets, and he goes to study the Old Testament, what we would call the Old Testament. And so he's going to begin studying the Hebrew texts and kind of start seeing this really vivid correlation and seeing oh shoot, the Old Testament really does speak highly of this man Jesus, who at this time was only a few generations from where Justin was at. And so at this time, he's going to also see a number of Christians who are martyred. And I think that at this time, I just missed this in my notes, I'm sorry, but he's going to travel to, just like he had traveled to Alexandria and Ephesus to explore kind of the heart of philosophy and wisdom, he's going to do the same thing for Christianity. At first, he's going to go to Ephesus because that was the church that Paul had really strongly established and was this very big cultural kind of pinnacle of Christianity at the time. And he's going to go there and learn quite a bit. And then he's also going to go to Rome, where he's going to be a very outspoken, kind of politically involved, but very much true to his philosophical roots, and also very, very true to his new faith in Christ. And so one thing I jotted down, which I thought was interesting, I really wanted to bring this up, was Unfortunately, for those who really didn't want spoilers for this episode, the fate of Justin is kind of in his name, which I always thought was interesting, that he was Justin Martyr when there's obviously lots of other martyrs who are
not
out
Justin
there.
the Martyr.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, like, what is that, his last name now?
It's like a surname or something. But, one thing I thought was interesting was that, like, Justin was... He always had such an attraction and such a high value of virtue, and he was always so committed to the ways of being a philosopher and a teacher and someone who imparts knowledge, that to me it was like, as soon as he went to Rome, it's like if there was someone like third person observing Justin, it's like as soon as he moves to Rome, which is one of the few places that heavy persecution against Christians was happening, it's like, oh, he's gonna get martyred. Like he's not gonna be a quiet kind of like pietistic, like just kind of keep your head down Christian. Like, no, he's gonna make a fuss, and he's going to, kind of take the Socratic approach of being the one who questions the authorities and who speaks against like kind of the icons of the age. And that's exactly what he did. The two texts that he's most well known for are his two apologies, not apologies as we think of it in English, like saying I'm sorry, but more of like the apologetics apologies, which is a defense of the faith. And so he's literally gonna write defenses of Christianity to the Roman emperors, essentially saying, hey, you guys are mistreating Christianity, but it's not just bad because I don't like it. It's bad because you're breaking your own philosophical views by doing this. And so he's going to talk about how the representations of Christianity in the empire are false and slanderous, and, obviously, again, Christianity's super niche at this time, so there's going to be these stereotypes of Christians are incestuous because they do things with their brothers and sisters, of course, not sexual stuff.
Also the eating flesh thing.
Yeah, they're cannibals, essentially. And so... Justin's going to write these texts to the emperor where he's going to say, first of all, you guys don't understand what Christianity is about. And then he speaks to what a love feast truly is. Is a love feast incest? No, it's not. It's about this.
It's kind of a tough name in English to defend.
In Greek, it's much better, but in English, it really doesn't sound great. And then, he's going to speak about the Eucharist, which, of course, is the accusation of Christians being cannibals. But then not only is he going to defend the virtue of Christian practices, he's also going to point out what the Romans are doing and be like, you guys don't have any moral grounds to stand on to call Christians incestuous, because look at all these myriad of very problematic problems within Roman culture where you guys are often engaging in like pedophilia, where there's like rampant prostitution going around, a lot of assault and abuse of women.
Could just do anything with a slave.
Right.
Full as if it was full property rights over any slave.
Yeah, so he's talking about how like within a Christian worldview, love is something that is meant to be like expressed towards all, but with that love comes respect. And with sex is meant to be this thing that exists within a sacred covenant. But then he looks at the Romans and he's like, you guys don't believe that. You believe that anyone who possesses lower status than you can basically be subject to sex, even without their consent. And so he's going to go, pretty hard in the paint, just criticizing the culture while also speaking highly and trying to kind of represent the views of Christianity. Another interesting thing that Justin is going to do is he's going to do something that we kind of saw Paul doing in the famous Mars Hill sermon, where not the Mars Hill, the rise and fall, you guys, I'm sure you're all podcast listeners, the original Mars Hill. But he's going to take the fact that he knows philosophy in and out, and he's going to start using concepts that are very commonplace in different schools of philosophy and kind of start tying those back into Christianity, being the fulfillment of those ideas. So like Stoicism, for example, has this idea of the logos or the logos as this kind of uniting word or idea that holds the universe together. And he's going to highlight that the logos is the term used for the word, which was Jesus, Jesus in John chapter 1. And that in John chapter 1, we have this beautiful and vivid portrayal of Jesus being kind of the starting spark of all of creation, that is directly from and part of the divine. And so he's going to say, well, hey, you guys have this idea of this unifying concept of all the world, and Jesus actually is that very thing. So he's going to try to kind of interconnect the ideas of modern philosophers and really tie together this idea that all of wisdom is God's wisdom. And it's not about just rejecting one and accepting another. It's really about recognizing that there is truth interspersed, but they're all kind of shadows that are pointing back to the Christ figure. You know, how does that strike you, Jacob?
Yeah, I think that's, the Gospel of John, traditionally understood to be written about this time, is explicitly trying to play with those themes, is trying to beg those questions out of the reader. So it was clearly in the discourse at the time to try to communicate, to translate what the Christ is to a mind that had no context from the Jewish writing. I mean, just imagining at that time, coming from no knowledge of the Jewish scriptures and trying to grapple with it and having to learn all of these terms,
right?
Just like having this translation process that I think is done, especially in the Gospel of John, of trying to connect through that classically Platonist Stoic concept of the logos. Is the only way it could have been done. Is the way there needs to be some kind of touch point between the two worlds, and I think that word, the mystery behind it does that for them.
And I think it's so interesting too when we look at the Old Testament and then we contrast it with the New, especially in how things like language and culture and even like the connection to ethnicity are kind of related, in that, like, I mean, and you and I have talked about this a number of times. I remember going to a bat mitzvah one time, and you compare going to a bat mitzvah service, which is like a coming of age for like a Jewish girl, and a bar mitzvah for a young boy. Compare that to going to like the church around the corner from your house. It's so interesting because at a church you walk in, and if you're not a believer, it's like most evangelical American churches wants to be like, we don't want to do anything super jarring for someone. We want them to know that they're understood. We want them to feel like we're kind of walking you through the steps, which, has its own pros and cons. But then you walk into a bat mitzvah and they do not care. It's like, if you know these songs, great. If you don't, you're going to sit here and listen to them. Like, it's in Hebrew. It's a very different approach than you'd expect from any like American, even like slightly Western kind of like worship service. And when you look at the Old Testament, it's so clear that being insular and being kind of its own thing is such a value. But then here, when we have the apostles and we have the church fathers, there's such a clear connection of like, we're not trying to water down what we have, but we're actually trying to highlight what is already present in order to elevate us to this higher understanding of the good news.
Yeah, I think that's a really hard thing for us to get our minds around, that there's a point in the Orthodox service where they say watch the doors, basically maintaining that traditional outlook that there's something dangerous about letting strangers come in to see this, Paul talks about the spies in our midst, that it was scandalous to let a stranger hear the words like eating the flesh of Jesus. And clearly that word was getting around and causing confusion among people. But the idea now for Americans especially, that there's anything worth guarding, that there's anything so holy or sacred about a service, that it would require being vigilant about who's there, who's watching, and who's participating. Is crazy to most Americans. Like, no, it should be able to be televised. It should be able to. You should be able to watch the service as a live stream.
Yeah,
there should be nothing that makes anyone feel too uncomfortable or makes people confused. Because confusion might sway them to leave or walk out of the service. That it's servicing a people who are just there to be spectators.
Sure.
As opposed to saying like, no, there is something that we are doing together that needs to be protected.
And that is like, I think it's interesting you point out that's like a very American thing, because it's probably got to do with like kind of our, one for all for one kind of, if it's good, then it should be good for everyone. And if it's good for everyone, then why isn't it accessible to everyone? Like when we think of like, Freemason stuff or Illuminati stuff, it's all secret. It's all secret things kind of done off in the darkness. So if someone told me, oh, I'm part of this new religion, and I'm like, oh, could I come and see one of your services? And they're like, you would have to do some steps first. I'd be like, what? What's going on here?
You'd be like, there's probably some abuse going on in there.
You immediately think that. Yeah. So it is interesting, but then I also think that on the flip side, making something overly we've kind of seen this with the Protestant church in America already. Like there's such a dire need to make something overtly accessible that now you just have churches in the suburbs, and it's very clear that God wants you to have a big house and a big truck, and wants you to retire and wants you to have a good 401k and live in wealth. Like eventually we dilute so much to connect it to the values of our time that soon there's no difference between Christianity and just being a good guy elsewhere, So
yeah, you bring up, I think, a key aspect of this, which is this idea that comes through the Germans, through the Protestant tradition, through Kant, the idea that if anything it ought to be done by everybody. You should make, it's the Kantian imperative that you should make no maxim that you wouldn't want everyone to follow.
Sure.
So as a corollary, it means that if someone is doing something that you can't also do, it's by nature anathema. There's something wrong with somebody being a monk or being a priest if you can't personally also do that, because it means there's something inaccessible to you.
Sure.
And for the American mind, it's everything needs to be accessible to me. I need to have the option to choose whatever lifestyle I want. And if you're saying I can't just try out being a monk or try out being a priest, or just decide to, if you just walk into a service and say, hey, what are you guys doing in here? What's this all about? Can I walk up here and poke around? What's in this box here?
Can I eat some of this bread? Yeah.
You're telling me I can't, you're letting everyone else have some and I can't have some? It's seen as elitist. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. What's interesting too is like, there is like, when we look at especially the early church, what we know of the early church was not super accessible. And I think like, when you think of Paul talking about the spies, and obviously a lot of the references to beware of the wolves in sheep's clothing, to be a Christian, especially in the 2nd century, you had to be very, very conscious of the people who you didn't know, because they could be a very legitimate threat to the entire community there. And so So even as far as something like to partake in communion, you couldn't just show up one Sunday and partake of the Eucharist. Like that had to be something. Oftentimes, you had to be catechized before that, so you're kind of like meeting and learning the routine of fasting and practicing what it is to be a Christian. Much like the philosophical schools, there was a rhythm to it. It wasn't just kind of you show up, partake of what you choose to partake of, and then continue living however you'd like to live. There was a bar that had to be met, which I think again a lot of that's been lost right now.
I think another aspect of that's hard to wrap your head around is how much of a safety net we have as citizens of a post-industrialized capitalist society, post liberalism society, where everyone has purportedly equal rights under the law.
Sure.
But to imagine at the time of being living under Rome and not being technically a Roman citizen, which was reserved for an elite group of people. It wasn't just a birthright to be a Roman citizen, being in the Roman Empire, that you relied on these communities of people, whether you were going with the Pythagoreans or the Stoics or the Christians, that these were your community, that there was no recourse to a social safety net.
Sure.
Which is how Christians, I think, kind of garnered so much just tacit support from the Roman Empire, that they were the only ones taking care of lepers and orphaned children being left out to be exposed.
Right.
That there wasn't a safety net if you were not a productive member of society. You could just starve and die.
Right.
So what they're protecting is not just their secrets, but also their livelihood. Like if this church gets broken up,
that's going to affect a lot of people.
Yeah, it's not just bummer, I don't have anything to do on Sundays anymore. It's
right.
This is the community that I eat with.
And it's the welfare of the local orphans and widows, right?
Yeah. So there's a lot more at stake in keeping this safe.
Yeah.
For everyone there.
And it's a fascinating kind of cycle to see how that's gone too, because I think we could easily say that a lot of the reasons why there is so much social welfare in our country, and the reason why we wouldn't let the average person just like starve to death if they stopped working, is because of the influence of Christianity over kind of like this modern humanist experience that our culture is mostly made up of. But it's like, in a weird way, it's like Christianity has affected our secular culture in such a way that Christianity itself, like the actual Christians in our culture, no longer really have that gauge of like what is required of them. And that's where we see like, a lot of churches that don't engage in the service of the needy and the poor and the oppressed around them, because now it's like, well, we don't need to support them. They just need to, file for Social Security, or they just need to go to DDD and get their benefits going, which praise God, there's benefits like that. But it's also like, dude, like this was always kind of like, for the earliest Christians were about this first and foremost. So I don't know. There's a lot of things we can go off there.
Yeah.
So let's get back to Justin real quick. Yeah. So Justin's story is going to end pretty abruptly here when he writes his second apology. He's going to insult a philosopher by the name of Crescens, who is a member of the Cynic philosopher school, which, of course, obviously it'd be a cynic who'd be mad at him, right? And so he's going to kind of report him to the Roman prefect Rusticus, and there's actually dialogue that exists between the interaction that Justin and Rusticus have during his trial, where Justin is basically like, yeah, I don't care. Like, you guys can martyr me. I know that I have life on the other side of this. And honestly, you're going to stand before a judge much higher than you, and you should probably repent before it's too late. So Justin just dropping gems until his last breath. And he's martyred via beheading in 165 AD. And like I said, there is something like genuinely poetic about Justin's life. Like, I don't know the lore behind why he's known as Justin Martyr. I know he's also known as Justin the Philosopher, but his life follows such a truly philosophical, like, I was even thinking about Socrates a little bit when I was looking at his story, because Socrates also very kind of anti-establishment guy, always kind of poking the bear and pointing out the kind of the inadequacies. Yeah. He was the pain in the neck of the establishment, and he paid for that with his life. And Justin, like, just, he kind of lived this perfect trope of being the philosopher who wasn't going to silence himself, who was going to speak out for the values of virtue, but also the value of like consistent truth. And he's going to do that in a very Christian and Christ honoring way. And that's where that's how he loses his life. So it just feels like, I mean, of course, every martyrdom is in some sense a tragedy as much as it is a triumph. But I think the cool thing about his story is that, like, he definitely followed the trajectory that he'd been on his whole life. This wasn't just like a random thing that happened. Like, this was like I said, by the time the dude got to Rome, he was as good as martyred, because Rome was the one city you really couldn't be a loud Christian, and Justin was committed to being a very loud and disagreeable Christian.
Yeah, and that's another thing that's really hard to imagine is the how compelling the martyrs were to bolstering the support of other Christians. It's in Athanasius is on the incarnation of the Word, where he basically says as a brag, like, look at all these martyrs we've got. How cool is that? That's so exciting. Look at all everyone's dying for the faith. Isn't that so cool? Come on aboard. Come see what it's all about.
Well, I remember, I mean, I've talked about this when we did our Polycarp episode forever ago, but I still think about this often, which is like, if a key member of any social group I was a part of especially an old man who was like well loved and well trusted, was like arrested and then burns to death. If that happens today, you'd have like riots in the streets, you'd have domestic terrorism in response to this. Like, there would be like
the t-shirts,
the t-shirts of like, all that
the murals
stuff. But the fact that, like, back then when Polycarp was martyred, the general response from the church was, good for him, man. Like, that's right, good for everybody. Like, to see, like, I mean, this was also a part of Justin's story, is that he witnessed martyrs in his time, and that bolstered his faith that Christianity was a worthwhile pursuit. Because
I don't know if that would really do it for me, to be honest.
I mean, I think it would scare me a little bit. It would make me see that the stakes were a lot higher than I was probably hoping for. But for a lot of people back then, they were just like, oh, people are willing to extend the highest virtue for this truth, then it must be true. But yeah, it'd probably make me, a little scared.
Yeah, a little shy.
Yeah. Well, dude, one last thing I wanted to ask before we wrap up here is, I know that you're a very well-read guy when it comes to philosophers, and Justin's kind of view is that of all the philosophers who were painting these different portrayals of how they saw the world, he saw Christ as the most compelling. How would you apply that to kind of your experience reading through modern and 20th century and just the philosophy that you've read? How do you see kind of Christ in that same role that Justin would, or do you at all?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I think the facet of Jesus as being the archetype of the new man, the argument that the logos, the way in which the method through which all things were made, being a man, having a face, having a personality, not being some abstract kind of Hegelian, force of history, but actually a man, a person. I think is more compelling than the philosophies of history, the philosophy of Heidegger, of kind of demythologizing the Christ, which was big in the 20th century German circles, of trying to again translate out of the symbols to desymbolize the meaning. Whereas I think it's more compelling to say that the symbol itself is doing the work and trying to translate. There's a point at which translating is a destruction, is taking it and dissecting it. It's like a rabbit. Like if you asked me, like if you having a pet rabbit, hey, do you know this rabbit? Like, are you friends with this rabbit? And I'm like, yeah, I feed it, I hold it, I pet it. I know it personally. I know its personality. And then you go to a scientist and you say, do you know this rabbit? And he's cut it up, and he's taken out the spleen, and he's dissected the spleen, and he knows the inside, and he knows the blood type of the rabbit. He knows the genetic. He has the DNA sequence, and he's like, yeah, I know the rabbit better than this guy. There's a point at which, like, taking things in their whole and knowing them as a person is irreplaceable from. And so much of the philosophy that we've inherited is about, especially from that Western route through the Germans, of dissection as the best way to know something. Coming back to a holistic view, a view that says that you can't take things, you can't know things in parts.
Right.
You have to know them as their whole. And that comes back to the situation that Justin Martyr found himself in, where he was trying to decide how to live, not just what to believe.
Right.
And not how he can dissect the Stoic philosophers and dissect the Platonic corpus, and but how am I going to live? How am I going to have a relationship with others? Is something that it can't be done alone in a room with a book, which is so much of what philosophy has become for most of the academic forms of philosophy.
That is really fascinating too, especially when you think, like, if the points of philosophy is not just to make time go by, just like, waxing eloquent and, navel gazing and kind of all the negative stereotypes against philosophy, but it's meant to be life giving. Like, it's meant to be a holistic thing that is supposed to make my life and the lives of others around me not just better, but like whole. Like, it's supposed to function the way it was intended. And then to think that the way that relationships and the experience of the world starts is through the origin point of the God man, which, like, Christ is, and that was the cool kind of like mic drop moment of this old man that he ran into, which may or may not have been a real man, but it's kind of this idea of all of your philosophy is pointless if it's not coming through the entry point, which is Christ. Like, outside of that, you're just missing the whole point. And I think that's really captivating. And yeah, what you said about the kind of dissection thing, it reminds me of that old saying about, like, if you have to explain a joke, it's like dissecting a frog. Like, you understand the frog better, but it has to die to do it. It's like, dissection and manipulation can give you some form of knowledge, but at the end of the day, is it knowledge that's really going to inform, or is it dead knowledge, basically? I mean, it even makes me think of last week talking about the Nestorian heresy of the people who wanted to divide Christ's divinity from his humanity, and they were like, no, we don't want to do that. Like, that's not a good idea. Like, this idea of, like, the more we divide something that was meant to be whole, the more damage we actually do to that thing. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. So
yeah, and then on the other side too, the way that the creeds have sort of, the Nicene Creed has sort of has made the messiness of the mysterious parts of the Christian faith as central, and trying to dissect and over translate the meaning of the Trinity, or to dissect the virginity of Mary as this very, they had this kind of and this still exists in the Catholic way of seeing things, but that because she couldn't have sinned, she therefore also had to have been immaculately conceived, because the sin gene passes through the male reproductive element. So they had this kind of like over dissected view of a spiritualized anatomy that then had these repercussions for how they saw the story of Mary, of taking it and adding this element to it, that then it's an overreach of the analytical mind to try to make things fit into categories that were never meant to be put into other categories other than themselves.
Right.
That, like, the Trinity is a category unto itself at some level. And that's, it's a fun kind of trick of the English language that we have, symbol and diabolical, like a symbol that means coming together, and diabolical, related to like Diablo, the devil, is being taken apart, is being pulled apart.
Oh, interesting.
And things being put together, coming together in the symbol is the way through which we can actually see clearer than if we tear it apart and dissect it.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, one thing I've always really loved and admired about the Eastern tradition, and I think the Lutherans have some of this together as well, is like their comfort in not even sitting in mystery, because that almost implies that you have to tolerate it in some sense, which I think is a very Western biased view, but just saying like, no, this is intentionally a mystery. We're not going to dissect it to understand it, which I think one of the reasons why the Nestorian heresy stands out to me so much is that it started with a philosophical conflict, where at the beginning they said, well, we can't call Mary the mother of God. Yeah. So now we have to kind of retcon how we see Jesus to fit this philosophical view. When in reality, they could just say, or we could call her the mother of God because she was Jesus's mom, and just kind of leave it there.
And that's how the story went. And, all four gospels agree that was his mom. Right.
And so
if we try to over intellectualize it in this way, I think it's always better to question when you encounter these kinds of either or fallacy questions, like she's either this or this, to maybe question, like, maybe it's a bad question.
Yes. Yeah.
Maybe it's like how long have you been beating your wife, John? Like, if you answer the question, you're agreeing to the premise.
Right.
You're conceding too much, and maybe just say it's a bad question.
Yeah. I mean, I heard someone recently define like emotional anxiety as believing that there are only two answers and both answers are terrible. And it's like at a certain point you have to say, well, if these are the only two options, then maybe it's my perspective that's actually skewed and not the two options that we have left. So yeah, I think being able to like ask those questions of kind of the approach that we have is really crucial, because otherwise, yeah, then we just end up chopping so many pieces into something, and like you said, overly categorizing things. Then we kind of have to jump through hoops, and we end up with things that just look, you know, not like they were wholly presented to us, which I think is really valid. Yeah. Well, dude, this was fun.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thanks for being here, dude. And thank you, dear listener, for hanging out with us tonight. It's been a good time. I hope you guys learned a little bit about our guy Justin. We appreciate you as always. We'd love it if you would send us a text message, or if you feel so inclined, shoot us hit that buy me a coffee link and buy us a coffee. But don't do that if you're not tithing. Make sure you're tithing first. I just gotta throw that out there. Do they still tithe in Orthodox churches?
Yeah, they have an expected amount that you're if you want to be a voting member of the parish council.
Yeah.
Then there's kind of a minimum that you're expected to be giving. But if you just tell the priest like, hey, I can't give that much, they're like, okay, well, you're a non-voting member of the parish council.
Wow.
But that's as far as my knowledge goes.
Okay.
I'm not even a full member yet, so
yeah,
it doesn't even really apply to me.
Do you think your priest would want to come on the show one time?
He is one of the busiest guys I've ever met.
Really?
Yeah. He seems a little overworked.
Shucks. Burnout's probably a big thing in the priesthood.
Yeah, especially when you're on your feet for like 5 hours on an average Sunday.
That is true. That sounds like a lot. Well, we'll wait for things to clear up for him a little bit. Maybe there's like down seasons in Orthodoxy. Like you got to get away from Advent for a little bit.
Yeah. Today there was he said that the Thursday liturgy is canceled because they have some other event, and there was audible groans. And I was thinking, like, give the guy a break. He's got other commitments, and
they're like, we're missing Thursday. Oh my gosh, that's so funny, man. They're really cracking the whip on this poor guy.
Yeah.
Well.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, if the Orthodox Church keeps growing, they're gonna need an insane number of more priests than they currently have.
Yeah, there's probably a big demand for that right now.
There's a dearth of priests.
Yeah. Cool, man. Well, we'll have to do this again sometime. I'm sure a lot of our listeners would just love the fact that you're coming with more of an Eastern perspective, because we don't get that very often, even though I know you're still kind of in the training camp for that. But
yeah, I can't really claim to be an Eastern.
Yeah, I'd say you're an Eastern guy putting on your Eastern garb, you know? Yeah, you're just not certified. You're not card carrying yet.
Wow.
In time.
Big respect. Thanks.
All right, guys. Thanks so much for listening. We'll talk to you real soon.
Thanks. Bye.